Scugog defers decision on picnic shelter design to September. Dan Kearns, The Standard. Scugog. Concerns about a proposed design have led Scugog Township to the decision on the Port Perry Picnic Shelter project to be deferred to September. At a meeting on Monday, June 20th, Scugog saw a report from Kevin Arsenault, the township's manager of capital projects, which recommended the contract for the project be awarded to Landco Group Incorporated in the amount of $240,824. According to the report, the project includes the design and construction of a new picnic shelter, removal and disposal of existing picnic shelter and concrete pad, and installation of a bicycle rack and bicycle repair station. However, Ward 1 Councillor Ian McDougall felt the design councillors saw in the report didn't match the historic aesthetics of the structures in nearby Palmer Park. When we proposed the replacement of the picnic shelter, perhaps it's my mistake, but I kind of thought we would be getting something which would be more in keeping with the upscaled nature of Palmer Park, he said. Councillor McDougall originally made a motion to defer the report to the July 19th council meeting. But, after hearing from township staff members, this would not offer them enough time to get the required information. The Ward 1 councillor withdrew his motion and instead proposed deferring it to the September 26th meeting. The motion also included having the design concept revisited to be more complementary to the existing Rotary Park gazebo and the elevated priority Palmer Park has as a whole to the community. In June 2021, Lindsay Park, Durham's MPP at the time, announced the township would be receiving a joint federal-provincial grant of $100,000 to replace the picnic shelter. Ward 5 Councillor Lance Brown questioned if the deferral will still keep the township on track to meet the grant's required deadline of completing the project by December 2023. Timing-wise, I believe if we defer this decision right now, construction probably won't start until next spring. But it would meet the deadline, Carol Coleman, Scugog's Director of Public Works and Infrastructure Services, responded. Ward 2 Councillor Jana Guido seconded the deferral motion. Opportunities don't come very often to build a structure or add something to what we've often referred to as one of our jewels of our municipality, and that is our waterfront. I fully support Councillor McDougall's request or direction for us to relook at what we are considering placing on the waterfront. It's not a temporary structure. It will be a structure which will hopefully last as long as the current one, which will last for a lifetime, Councillor Guido stated. The township estimates the current picnic shelter was built sometime in 1985.
Peter Bethlenfalvy returns to Queen's Park as Finance Minister. Dan Kearns, The Standard. Uxbridge. Pickering Uxbridge MPP Peter Bethlenfalvy has been named Ontario's Finance Minister once again. On Friday, June 24th, Ontario Premier Doug Ford and his cabinet members were sworn in and announced during a live-streamed ceremony. Mr. Bethlenfalvy had previously served as Finance Minister in the provincial government's last term of office. He was appointed to the role in December of 2020 after the resignation of Rod Phillips from the cabinet position. I want to thank Premier Ford for putting his faith in me with my reappointment as Minister of Finance. I look forward to continuing to serve in this portfolio to get it done for the people of Ontario, a statement from Mr. Bethlenfalvy read. Some of the other cabinet role positions announced included Sylvia Jones as Minister of Health and Deputy Premier, Michael Ford as Minister of Citizenship and Multiculturalism, Parm Gill as Minister of Red Tape Reduction, and the return of Stephen Leachy to the role of Minister of Education. In his closing remarks, Premier Ford said, "Now that cabinet members have been named and sworn in, now is the time to unite. Now is the time to work together. This is a government which must represent everyone," the Premier said. He also noted one of the biggest challenges facing the government moving forward will be the uncertain global economic climate. A number of local residents have filed to run in the 2022 municipal elections. Dan Kearns, The Standard. North Durham, Kawartha. A number of new candidates have recently filed to run in the 2022 municipal election this autumn in North Durham and Kawartha Lakes municipalities. In Uxbridge, Dave Barton is running for re-election as mayor of the township. Current Ward 3 Councillor Bruce Gerard is running for Regional Councillor. Pam Beach will be looking to retain her seat as Ward 1 Councillor. 2 residents have filed to run in Ward 2. They are Gord Shreve and former Councillor Pat Malloy. Zed Pickering is running to become the next Ward 3 Councillor. Willie Pop is running for re-election in Ward 4. Todd Snooks is looking to keep his job as Ward 5 Councillor, but is being challenged by resident Christine McKenzie. Wilma Watton is running to be Scugog's next mayor following Bobby Drew's retirement from municipal politics. Current Ward 1 Councillor Ian McDougall is running to be the next regional councillor. Janet Guido is running for re-election as Ward 2 Councillor. Robert Rock is looking to retain the Ward 3 seat. Longtime resident Harold Wright is running for the Ward 4 Councillor job. Ivo Finati is looking to become the Ward 5 Councillor. In Brock Township, there is a race for mayor, as current councillors Ted Smith and Walter Schumer have both filed to run for the position. Another current councillor, Michael Jubb, is looking to become the regional councillor. Resident Peter Frank is running to become the Ward 1 councillor. Claire Doble is seeking re-election as Ward 2 councillor. Angela Canavan has filed to run for the Ward 3 councillor seat. Kriya Pettingill is seeking re-election as Ward 4 councillor, and Lynn Campbell is seeking another term as Ward 5 councillor. 2 candidates have filed to run for the Durham Regional Chair role. They are current Durham Chairman John Henry and former Durham federal election candidate Cardil Telt Patch. There is currently a 3-person race for mayor in Kawartha Lakes, with current councillors Doug Elmsley and Pat Dunn, as well as Jolie Schiedler-Benz running for the job. Don Logan has filed to run for the Ward 1 councillor seat. Pat Warren and Jamie Brown are both running for the Ward 2 councillor job. Mike Perry and William Denby are both seeking to become the next Ward 3 councillor. Ian Nicholson has filed to run for the Ward 4 councillor position. Duncan Gallagher is looking to become the Ward 5 councillor. In Ward 6, there is a race between incumbent councillor Ron Ashmore and Gerard Gileson for the ward councillor job. Zachary Teasdale and Charles McDonald have filed for the Ward 7 councillor position. Kawartha Lakes ended 2021 with an over $7 million surplus. Dan Kearns, The Standard. Kawartha Lakes. The city of Kawartha Lakes finished 2021 with a net surplus of over $7 million. At a meeting on Tuesday, June 21st, Treasurer Carolyn Daines presented councillors with the annual audited financial statement and surplus disposition report. In her presentation, Ms. Daines explained the COVID-19 pandemic played a role in the size of the surplus. If I was asked if that was going to repeat itself, I would say no. I think most of the reasons for the surplus are based on the pandemic, she said. Pandemic grants offset some of the lost revenue we had, or increased expenses in the case of Victoria Manor. Ms. Daines added, pandemic closures led to a decrease in utility costs, and training costs were reduced as well because of the switch to virtual lessons. The fact staff members were working from home, the office supply and the photocopy expenses were a lot less, she stated. Ms. Daines then gave an early projection for the 2022 financial picture. We are seeing winter control expenditures are quite a bit higher than 2021, she said. There's a resolution on my report as well to bring in funds for paramedic staffing. We've seen quite an increase of call volume in the paramedic area, and we are not 100% positive whether or not the Ministry of Health is going to advance any more pandemic funding. But she noted, city revenues are starting to go up. We're not quite up to the 2019 level, but we are certainly above the 2020 level, so there is some indication of recovery there. Councillors later voted to transfer portions of the surplus into several municipal reserves. In 2020, Kawartha Lakes had a surplus of $4.5 million.
Kawartha Lakes adopts new Indigenous Peoples related policies. Dan Kearns, The Standard. Kawartha Lakes. On National Indigenous Peoples Day, Tuesday, June 21st, the City of Kawartha Lakes officially adopted multiple policies in regards to First Nations people and a new land acknowledgement. The policies respond to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's (TRC) calls to action to redress the legacy of residential schools and advance the process of Canadian reconciliation, a Kawartha Lakes press release stated. One of the adopted policies is a First Nations consultation policy. The City of Kawartha Lakes does not currently have any policy respecting its consultation practices with the First Nations, which have historical ties to the geographical region which is the City of Kawartha Lakes. Many statutes, as in the Planning Act, Heritage Act, and Environmental Assessment Act, set out the city's obligation to consult with First Nations which may be impacted by development. The purpose of the proposed consultation policy, attached at Schedule A, is to itemize these various statutory requirements so staff have a clear understanding of the city's obligations, read a report from City Solicitor Robin Carlson. The press release explained Council also adopted a repatriation policy to address repatriation of Indigenous artifacts and remains and sharing of archival information with First Nations. Lastly, an education policy was adopted as part of reconciliation efforts. The purpose of the education policy, at Schedule D, is to provide a foundation upon which Council and the Planning Advisory Committee can provide a land acknowledgement. In other words, taking advantage of the education provided, pursuant to the education policy, will allow Council and the Committee to understand the factual basis for the land acknowledgement, Ms. Carlson's report read. A further and related purpose of the education policy is to provide a foundation for staff upon which they can feel confident in carrying out the city's statutory obligation to consult. The report added, City councillors and staff members will be educated on the history of the Aboriginal peoples, including the history and legacy of residential schools, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Treaties and Aboriginal Rights, Indigenous Law, and Aboriginal Crown Relations. Those who take part will undergo skills-based training in intercultural competency, conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism. At the June 21st meeting, Mayor Andy Letham read a land acknowledgement and called the newly adopted policies important. Council has endorsed these recommendations and have been in consultation with First Nations people. This is our commitment to starting the process for truth and reconciliation, he said.
The Standard Podcast was produced by Greenstream Studio for the Standard newspaper.